Hello, trumpet players. This video is a response to a question we got on our body tension video. And we're going to talk today about how to be focused and completely single-minded. This is my second time trying to make this video. The first time ended up being way too long, and my camera went out and I didn't know it. I don't have a camera that has the little red light on it, so I can't tell when it stops. And if I get carried away and start talking really long, it can stop recording and I have no clue that, and then I just keep going. So let's hope that doesn't happen this time. So we're gonna break this video, the answer to this question, we're gonna break it up into two parts. And the reason for that is what took up most of the time in the other video, in my other attempt, was trying to explain this first point. So in this video, we're gonna just state the first point, then go on to the other points, and then have a separate video for the first point. And I think that'll work a lot better. And I think that that first point is so very important and it needs really its own video. All right. So, and what is that point? Now remember, we're talking about how to be completely focused and single-minded. How do you develop that skill? And I don't think it's possible to be completely focused and single-minded if you don't have a message. So that's the first thing. And this is kind of consistent with business and, when you have a website or a business or something, you're supposed to have like a general message that you have for the people. In music, it's the same way. I really believe that. You have to have something you're trying to tell the world. What are you trying to say to people? And without that, what is it that you're completely focused on? Well, without that, what are you doing? Really, take a step back and think about that. Without that message, what are you doing on the horn? Are you playing? Are you having fun? Well, maybe that should be your message, but you see my point. If your whole purpose for picking up the horn is because it's fun, there's a big part of this that you're missing. And we'll get deeper into that. I don't want to waste any more time on that first point now. Okay, because we do have other points that I really should spend more time on. And I was shrinking them last time because I knew I had gone too long on the other subject. All right. To be completely focused. So remember, okay, I'm gonna establish, we're gonna come back to the message thing later. Now let's go into the nuts and bolts. To be completely focused and single-minded, you have to be able to turn off all of those things that are going to get in your way, musically speaking. So for example, we want all of the technique to be there. How are you going to be completely single-minded and focused if you have to worry about the key signature, or you have to worry about how the rhythms go and things like that? Those things, if you haven't mastered that stuff, there's no completely focused. There's no single-minded. That's just not going to happen. It's not possible. All right. So, and so we want to have, of course, this means you got to practice, right? And if you probably knew that was coming somehow, right? But it's not good enough just to spend the time. You know, there's this guy that came out with the whole 10,000 hour rule. And if you don't know anything about that, look it up. It says that if you want to be world class at anything, you have to spend at least 10,000 hours doing it. Now we're talking about world class, right? We're talking about best of the best of the best. What I've learned in my teaching career is that you could put in those 10,000 hours. Now, most people won't make it 10,000 hours like that. But hypothetically, let's say you were someone who just puts in the time and goes through the motions. I'm sorry, that 10,000 hours isn't going to do anything for you. So it's not good enough just to spend the time practicing. You have to practice in a way that actually takes the technique and gets it out of your way, right? So that's a very important thing. So what are we looking for when we practice? We want practice techniques that make playing the instrument second nature. What is second nature? That's like automatic. You don't have to think about it. Your conscious mind isn't thinking about it. I've had experiences like that where I'm just playing and I'm looking and I'm like, wow, looking at my fingers and I'm nailing the music, right? And I'm looking, I'm thinking, wow, that's great. That's subconscious. That's second nature. Okay. Now, I want to point out quickly, before we get into some of these other details on the practice, I want to point out how beneficial my daily routines are for helping you become more focused and single-minded. And no, the previous video was not a way to bait you into this topic, okay? I don't do that kind of stuff. But those routines were built the way they were because they have this effect. The way my daily routines are set up, and when I say my daily routines, I'm talking about all of my routine books. The Physical Trumpet Pyramid book, the Daily Routines book, the Chops Express book, and now the Hopeful, the series. I hope another book of that comes out before the new year. But the Chops series, the Trumpet Chops series, these are all different versions of the same routine. And what makes them the same is that we're going through an order of the exercises that allows us to concentrate on one thing at a time. Now, can you see the connection between that and the single-minded thing, right? So when we're doing the air thing, we're only thinking about the air. When we're doing lip buzz, the air is still there. We spend a little bit of time at the beginning of the routine thinking about the air, so that when we shift the air into our subconscious, we can let that go automatic and now focus on the embouchure for the lip buzz. Right? The air is automatic. I'm focusing now on the posture of the lips, and I want to have that same air as I did before, but I don't have to think about it because I already thought about it earlier. See how that works? And one physical element after another, we're pushing it once again on a daily basis into our subconscious. Okay? That's how the routine is built, so that by the end of it, you're double tonguing and triple tonguing, and all of the other levels of the pyramid. Now, the pyramid is the structure that the routine is based on. All the other levels of the pyramid have now been pushed into your subconscious. I believe that's how the books work, how my routines, what makes them so valuable. Is this what we're talking about? If you don't have to think about the physical stuff, then there's less obstacles to get in the way of your expression, right? So that's the next thing we want to look at is having a routine that gets the physical stuff out of the way. And if you don't know my routines, I strongly recommend that you get started with them. If you are someone who has more than 2 hours a day to practice, I recommend my Daily Routines book. If you have less than 2 hours a day to practice, I recommend the Chops Express book. Now, moving on from that, we want to do also scale patterns, not just scale like band scales. We don't want those kind of scales. Practice those scales for band, but in terms of what they do for you, their use is very shallow. What you get out of practicing band scales is very shallow compared to practicing scale patterns. Now, I recommend that you practice the tonalization studies. Now, this is starting to sound like an ad for my books, but this is a topic, this whole single-minded thing is a topic that's related to how my books work. So it would be stupid for me not to actually mention them in this context. All right? So I believe that when you practice scale patterns, many scale patterns in one key at a time, you get acclimated to that key and you start thinking in that key. And what that does for you is when you're doing things like sight reading or reading stuff that's in hard keys or transposing or improvising, you don't have to think about the key. Because that becomes, just like what we talked in the routine, that becomes, when I do this, I'm pointing at the back of my head. And to me, that symbolizes, the back of my head symbolizes the subconscious mind. And if you practice your scales that way, where you're doing, now the way I teach my students, we're doing 20 patterns on each scale before we do another scale. Usually just one a day, sometimes one a week, sometimes one a month, depending on where you are in your progress. But the whole point of that is so that the scales that you do become so deep, deep, deep in your subconscious that they're out of the way. You don't have to worry about them. Now, putting that stuff aside, we want to also say, and let's make this a second point, because the first point was more about getting set up physically and technically, right? And the second point, third point, actually, what I'm saying, now it's getting confusing. Okay, let's recap real quick before we move on. First point is have a message. Second point is get the technique out of the way so that it's not interrupting your thought process. Now, third point, that's where we're at now. Third point is to practice your music, your literature, in a way that makes that second nature. Okay? Now, really, the most important part of that is that you have to have a plan. You don't just sit down and start going after the music. And I've said this. There's a video, I'll link to it here. There's a video that I wrote about the all-state music this year. And it applies to everybody, but I was writing, speaking specifically to students in high school, but it applies to everyone. The worst way to practice is to just try. That's the worst way to practice. You can see that here. You got to have a plan. And usually that plan should involve a proven, and that's the key word here, a proven practice technique. That could be the Metronome Method. That's the one most people learn first. Slow it down, play it at a tempo you can play it at, and slowly speed it up after 10 times at this tempo, 10 times at that tempo, and on like that. So techniques like that. I use a working backwards technique. Actually, now for music, I have a whole series of steps that I use with my students. And we want to be organized like that. We want to have a plan. So that one of the things that happens when you have a plan is that you don't waste your time. Right? You get more done with less time. It feels like you're getting less done. That's one of the ironies of great practicing, right? Great practicing feels like you're not getting anything done. Horrible practicing, you get through the song, right? It's like, I just played through the whole song. Wow. Right? Well, that's horrible. That's like the worst kind of practice you can do. You know, sometimes I will assign 3 pages of music to a student. They'll get back the next week and have it all finished. Except it's not, right? They got through it all. Got through it all. But they can't play it. That's not what we want. You don't try to get it all done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. A nice 3-page piece of music, let's say for a solo contest or whatever, should take you months to prepare if you're going to do it right. So anyway, yeah, we want to have a plan. Following certain steps. We can talk more about that in the videos. I have a book coming out. I have way too many books coming out, but one of the ones I'm most excited about, there's a PDF rough draft version that I gave to a internet student, Skype student in Alabama, and he used it, and you know, what's amazing about, I know I'm on a tangent, but you know what's amazing, and I knew this all along, now that I have the book that I can use, I'm actually seeing it in action. A lot of people want to practice, and it's fine, right? I sell my routine books, and I like when people buy my routine books and use them. But you know what? When you use a plan to practice your literature, your songs, and the solos that you have to play or whatever it is that you have to perform in public, when you use a plan to practice that music, there's nothing better for your chops than learning how to play a piece of music right. There's nothing better for your chops than having a plan that's going to help you learn how to play the music and executing that plan in your practice time. There's nothing better than your chops. There's no book you can buy on high notes. There's no book, not even my routine books, never come even close to helping your chops the way learning a piece of music while using a plan can help your chops. And I know that's a tangent. We're talking about being totally focused, but that's part of it. You know, there's other benefits. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. There's many benefits for all of these things that we're talking about. And I don't mind stopping in the middle of something to say, hey, this other benefit is also good. Anyway, so on to the next half of point 3 is we want to always practice slow and deliberate. I had a student for years, a gentleman that's a little bit older than me, maybe 10 years, and 10 years older than me, and he's from China. He grew up in China, and he's actually a real Tai Chi student. And I mentioned to him in one of our lessons one time about practicing slow, and I told him, not knowing that he was a Tai Chi student, I said, I always thought that practicing correctly the slow and deliberate way was a lot like what I see people doing with Tai Chi. And he lit up, and he told me about some Tai Chi masters, because we were talking in his lesson about how to practice slow so you can play fast. And he told me about Tai Chi masters that he knew, that he had seen, that were some of the fastest martial arts experts in the world. And if you know anything about Tai Chi, they when they're doing that stuff, they almost look like they're standing still. And there's a lot to be said about that. And in terms of being single-minded and completely focused. I can't imagine that you could actually pull that off if you are practicing on the other side of that peace line, right? When you go slow, you're on this side of the peace line. When you go fast, you're on the other side of the peace line. In other words, there's no peace on that side. What you're experiencing is not a peaceful thing, it's a chaotic, stressful thing. All right? So I can't imagine that practicing fast. And by the way, when you practice with a plan, that plan better include two things. When you practice with a plan, it better have repetition, or there's something wrong with the plan. Doing the music correctly. Not hundreds of times, thousands of times. It sounds like an exaggeration, it's not an exaggeration. You do the music, you practice the music correctly thousands of times. Repeating it over and over and over again. And it better include also this slower tempo. My students are not supposed to practice at full tempo. Like if they have a competition or something or a major performance, they're not supposed to practice the stuff in tempo until about 2 or 3 weeks before the performance or the competition. And the reason for that is it has to do with this, remember why we're talking about being completely focused. Because that's how you get rid of the body tension. Completely focused takes all of your energies, and I know that sounds new age. I'm not a new ager, but there's not a better way to say that. It takes all of your mental energies, your physical energies, and focuses it in one direction. And that's important. So yeah, we want to have, when we practice using a system, we want to have those two things. It has to be slower and it has to have repetition in it, or you're not getting a real practice involved. All right, so on to the fourth point. I do believe that it's important to practice stuff that helps you practice expressing yourself. Now, that can be playing easy music that you pour your heart and soul into. And I think sometimes when we play lyrical studies, I think that kind of does that for us sometimes. If you're a classical player, when we do the Conconi studies, or I have a wonderful book that I got years ago of lyrical excerpts. Phil Collins wrote it. I remember when I got the book, I was still a student of Dick Schaefer, and I asked him, "Is that the Phil Collins?" And he goes, "Is there any other?" Speaking about the trumpet player, right? I thought that was very funny. Anyway, so there's a great book by Phil Collins that has a bunch of, and when I say excerpts, I'm not talking about excerpts, trumpet excerpts. I think one of my favorites in that book is the oboe part. I don't remember what that's from, Berlioz, I think. And it's just beautiful music. I think there's Haydn in there, there's Brahms, all kinds of classical themes that they're easy enough that you can not worry about the technique and just practice expressing yourself. Remember, we're going back to number one here, right? Number one is that you have to have a message. Well, you need to actually spend time practicing sharing that message through your music. And I think that's one of the, One thing I didn't say, and this is going to be part of the other video complementing this video, we cannot separate music from the culture, okay? So when we practice lyrical studies as some mechanical process that creates music, that's just completely wrong. You can't play lyrical studies and turn off that cultural element. It's me speaking to you, or the trumpet player speaking to the audience through the instrument, right? So that's one thing, as you practice lyrical studies. I think that's probably the most important reason why we want to practice lyrical studies, not to get the mechanics of phrasing and all that stuff, but to actually learn how to express yourself. But there's also other ways to do that as well. Aside from practicing lyrical studies, another way to practice expressing yourself is to practice free improvisation. Now, it works in the same way that lyrical studies work, because with lyrical studies, you're bringing the technique level down, and what you're emphasizing is the expression, right? Well, in free improvisation, the technique level is whatever you make it. Since nothing has been established beforehand, for example, what is your first note when you do a free improv? The first note is the first note you play. It's as simple as that. What comes out is what was meant to come out. So by doing free improvisation, you're taking all technical concerns out of the picture. Now, that's how I approach free improv. And I know there's different ways to do free improv where you add elements of control. But we're not talking about this as a musical genre. We're talking about this as a way to express yourself. And when I pick up my horn and do a free improvisation, I don't think about what note I'm going to play. I don't think about what I'm going to try to do. I am 100% expressing the thoughts, the feelings, the moods, the emotions, whatever it is that I'm feeling at that time is coming out of the horn. Now, I can do that now because I've done it for so many years, decades, right? I've been freely improvising for decades. I'm going to give you a short demonstration. So I actually did a previous take on this part of the video, and one thing you'll notice if you heard the other take is that these two improvs were completely different. So when we take all of the physical and technical constraints out of the equation, you can spend your mental energies and everything all of your energy, mental, physical, all of it going in one direction. You're expressing your feelings. Now, if you've never done free improv before, I have two links up here for you. This first one is a link to my free improv videos. I don't remember how many they are. There's almost 50 of them, maybe more than 50. Most of them are me playing by myself. Some of them are from a few years back where I did free improv with some other players. Um, and I want you to watch those and get an idea of what expression, unbridled expression, looks like, sounds like. Okay. And then also there's another playlist that I'll click to here that I'll link to. I said click to. That I'll link to that talks about. Now it's a series, and I think I only have 1 or 2 videos in the series, but at least you can get started. It talks about how to do free improvisation. So if you were interested in that, you can start doing that. Now, for the expression stuff we've talked about so far, the lyrical studies, we've talked about free improvisation. Now we're going to talk about one more option. If there's a song that you have already mastered, that's not necessarily lyrical. It can be Carnival of Venice, for that matter, right? It doesn't have to be something slow, but you have to have mastered it. And I would say for this, what we're talking about, you probably want to have it memorized too, all right? But if you have something that you have mastered technically, you can pull that piece out and play it. Play it with your eyes closed. I think that's the best way to do that. Play it with your eyes closed. Think of what think of your message while you're performing it. Now this is a mock performance. I'm not telling you to do this in front of other people. Pretend to, I'd have we do with my students and in my own practice, we do a lot of mock performances. A lot of that. I mean, compared, relatively speaking, I don't want to make it sound like it's the majority of what we do or anything like that. That's not the case. But I don't think most people do as much as we do. We do a lot of mock performance, and the reason for that is we want to get to that place on each of the pieces that we do, that we perform, to get to that place where we can express ourselves through the music. Whether or not you're going to perform it, reading it or not reading it, you should memorize the music. If you want to be, remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about combating body tension. And as I said in the body tension video, if you follow these 4 things that I'm showing you here, it will go a long way towards not having body tension, right? So, I think this is, a lot of people will say that this is overkill. You don't have to perform the piece by memory. Why are you going to practice it by memory? Why are you going to memorize it? Well, if you're dealing with body tension, one of the things you want to be able to do is perform expressing yourself through the piece of music. You can't do that if you're reading it. Okay? Oh, I shouldn't say you can't. I'm talking about students right now. So, yes, of course, seasoned pros can sight read something and sound like they're expressing themselves. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about students who are trying to get better and have trouble with muscle tension. Okay? Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. If you are dealing with muscle tension and you have a performance coming up, memorize the composition that you're performing so that you can play it with your eyes closed. And while your eyes are closed, instead of thinking about the notes, instead of thinking about the rhythms, instead of thinking about the mechanics of playing the piece, focus your mind on the message that you have for the audience. That's what you're going to be thinking about while you... Now, of course, You can't do this until you've done preparation, a whole series of several months worth of preparation to get to that point. But once you get to that point, then you can get to that area where you're that place where you're closing your eyes, playing the piece by memory, and communicating through that music. Actually, well, a very important part of learning a piece of music, in my opinion, is memorizing it, whether you have to play it by memory anyway or not. You know, the sequence that I use to teach my students how to learn a piece of music, it includes memorizing the music. Most of them say that it wasn't hard to memorize the music because they'd played the music so many times. Remember, thousands of times. If you've played it thousands of times, how hard is it going to be to memorize it? Okay? So there you go. Let's do a short recap. Have a general message. We're going to have another video about that. Get to where you're not struggling with the technique. That includes getting a daily routine and also learning your different scales through all the patterns. And then practice with a plan. And then finally, practice expressing yourself. And under that category, we talked about three things. We talked about expressing yourself through lyrical studies. We talked about expressing yourself through free improv. And then we talked about expressing yourself on a piece that you've mastered. And you can close your eyes, and instead of thinking about mechanics, you can just play and express yourself through that music. All right? If you have any questions about this, please feel free to ask below. We're creeping up on 1,000 subscriptions, so I'm going to ask you, if you're not subscribed, please help us out and subscribe to this channel. I almost said station. And like the video if you like it. And other than that, God bless you guys, and we will see you on the next video.